My name is Esther. I'm 79 years old, and until recently, the world thought I was losing my mind. That's the thing about aging. People stop seeing you. They stop listening. They confuse slower steps with slower thoughts. They see gray hair and think weakness. They hear forgetfulness and assume incompetence. But I remember everything. Every word, every whisper, every lie told in the voice of concern. I didn't start this journal for revenge. I started it because I was scared. Scared that if I didn't write things down, they'd vanish. Scared that I was maybe becoming what they said I was. Confused, paranoid, no longer capable. But the more I wrote, the more I saw. Patterns, manipulations, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Gentle voices covering firm control. It wasn't just forgetfulness, it was theft. Not of money, though that came too, but of dignity, of autonomy, of my name on my own mailbox. They called it guardianship. They said it was for my protection. But I know what it really was. A hostile takeover, dressed in paperwork and pity. I lived my whole life with numbers, ledgers, and accountability. I balanced the budgets of entire nonprofits. I could spot fraud in a spreadsheet from across the room. And yet when the betrayal came, it didn't come through numbers. It came through my son, my only child. He smiled as he took everything, and I let him, or so he thought. This is not just a story about elder abuse. It's not just about legal tricks or betrayal wrapped in love. It's about the moment a woman realizes she is not gone. It's about memory and the fight to keep your voice when others try to write your ending. So here is mine, in my own words, while I still remember, while I still can. After Harold passed, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt like it had given up. The clocks ticked louder, the nights stretched longer, and the room seemed to echo with things I wasn't ready to hear. For the first time in decades, I was alone in a house built for two. At first, David was attentive, too attentive. He'd come by every few days with groceries I hadn't asked for and questions I hadn't invited. "Are you eating enough? You sure you should be driving? Maybe I should help with your mail, just in case." It sounded like love, but there was something off in his tone, something watchful. Tammy, his wife, was always smiling. She had a way of speaking that felt like honey poured over something rotten. "We just want what's best for you, Esther." But she stared at my wedding band a little too long. Once I caught her slipping open my jewelry box when she thought I was napping. They started suggesting that the house was too much for me, that maybe it was time to think about next steps. It wasn't said cruelly. That was the trick. It was always wrapped in concern. "You shouldn't have to clean gutters at your age. You deserve to relax, Mom." But I wasn't tired. I was grieving. That's not the same thing. Then little things began to shift. I'd find drawers rearranged, bills opened, prescriptions moved. When I asked, David said, "You probably just forgot. It happens." But it didn't used to happen. Not to me. I was a numbers woman. Balanced budgets in my sleep. Memorized figures like lyrics to a favorite song. But suddenly, David was double-checking everything I did, like I was a child playing grown-up. Once I misplaced the electric bill. It turned up days later in Tammy's purse. She laughed it off. "Silly me," she said, too quickly. I started writing things down. First, simple reminders, then notes about conversations, then the dates David visited, what he said, what he touched. I didn't call it a journal, not yet. It was just a notebook, a habit, a lifeline I didn't know I'd need. And then came the questions I couldn't ignore. Have you thought about who should make decisions if something happens to you? Do you know where your will is? Can I have the name of your lawyer, just for safekeeping? The alarms weren't blaring, but I could hear the hum, the kind of warning you only recognize if you've lived long enough to know when love becomes something else. So I smiled, I nodded, I pretended, and I kept writing, because something was coming, and I wasn't going to meet it empty-handed. It started with missing details, small things. The electric bill I knew I paid, suddenly past due. My checkbook with pages torn out. David's name showing up as a co-signer on a bank statement I never authorized. I confronted him, gently, because that's what mothers do. David, did you make any changes at the bank? He looked hurt, surprised, like I'd accused him of theft. Mom, you must have forgotten. We went together, remember? You wanted help managing things. I hadn't, and we didn't. But I didn't argue. Not then. Tammy began showing up alone, dropping off casseroles I didn't ask for, and rummaging through drawers when she thought I was asleep. I started to feel like a guest in my own home. No, not even that. A patient. Then came the first document, folded neatly in a manila envelope. David said it was just routine, a medical release, and power of attorney form. Nothing's changing, he said. Just in case something happens, it'll save a lot of time and trouble. The words felt slick in my hand. I didn't sign. That's when the tone changed. David started arriving with papers in hand. His voice, still calm, had an edge now. I just want to help. But if you keep resisting, it makes me look like the bad guy. Don't do that to me. I started locking my bedroom door, hiding things, making excuses to avoid being home when they came. But I also started writing more, and not just reminders now, records. I'd always loved numbers, the logic, the clarity. I'd spent decades creating ledgers that told the truth in columns and rows, so I created a new kind of ledger. But this time, it was hidden inside a journal that looked like chaos. Pages filled with scribbles, misspelled words, nonsense sentences. To anyone else, it looked like dementia on paper, but every name, every number, every strange little mark, it all meant something. It was a map, a record, a defense, because I knew in my bones that something worse was coming. One Sunday morning, I heard the front door open without a knock. David stepped in like he owned the place. He carried a clipboard and wore the kind of smile people use when they're about to deliver bad news they think you're too fragile to hear. We have a meeting with Dr. Halbrook tomorrow, he said, not asked. Why? I asked. Just a wellness check. He specializes in geriatric assessments. I didn't like the way he said the word geriatric. It hung in the air like a label I hadn't chosen. The visit was worse than I expected. The doctor was polished and distant. He asked questions too quickly, barely let me finish a sentence. Every time I hesitated to recall a date or struggled to name something on the spot, I saw David glance at him, eyebrows raised like, "See?" I knew what they were doing. I wasn't supposed to know, but I did. I left that visit with a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment and a follow-up scheduled without asking me. The next week, I found a brochure on my kitchen table, Transitioning to Assisted Living, a guide for families. It was no longer subtle. When I asked David about it, he sighed like I was being difficult. Mom, I'm trying to do the right thing here, but you're making this hard. Tammy stood behind him, arms crossed, her mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That night, I added 4 new entries to my journal. Dates, phrases, the name of the doctor, the diagnosis, and the placement of every brochure and document. My handwriting was messier now, intentionally. The sentences more broken. I added little mistakes on purpose, let them think I was slipping. Because if they believed that, they'd stop hiding things. And if they stopped hiding, I could finally see the whole picture. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here, but they didn't know I had already started to build my ark. The letter came in a pale blue envelope, too neat to be innocent. It was from the county court. Inside was a notice of hearing. Petition for adult guardianship. Esther M. Langford. Filed by David Langford. My son. I held the paper so tightly it wrinkled beneath my fingers. There was no warning, no conversation, just a legal ambush. I tried calling him. He didn't answer. The next morning, Tammy arrived instead. She said David was too overwhelmed and thought it would be better if she explained. She sat at my kitchen table like she owned it. It's not personal, Esther. It's protection. The doctor says you're starting to struggle, and this way, David can make decisions quickly if needed. It's about peace of mind. Peace for who? That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed at the window, watching shadows cross my lawn. I was trying to understand when my life had stopped being mine. At the hearing, David looked somber in a charcoal suit. He brought Dr. Halbrook, who testified to my supposed decline. A neighbor I barely knew claimed I left the stove on. Tammy nodded tearfully. They made me sound like a confused old woman fumbling through each day, unaware of reality. When I tried to speak, the judge looked at me with pity, not interest. My voice shook. My hands did not. I am still me, I said. I remember everything. They didn't care. Or maybe they didn't believe. The guardianship was granted. David gained full control over my assets, my medical care, and my residency. Within a week, he moved me out of my home. He didn't even let me pack my things. The place they took me to was called Rose Hill Memory Residence. It had floral curtains and fake smiles. They confiscated my handbag at the front desk for safety. I wasn't allowed to keep my phone, or my jewelry, or my notebooks. But they missed one. The small red ledger I'd sewn into the lining of my suitcase. They thought they had taken everything. But they forgot I'd lived my life balancing ledgers, tracking patterns, hiding money where auditors couldn't find it. If they wanted a woman who didn't know what was happening, they picked the wrong one. And if David thought he'd won, he'd underestimated two things, my memory and my rage. At Rose Hill, time didn't move. It sagged. Days bled into each other like watercolors left out in the rain. Everything was soft, pastel, and padded. The walls were peach. The music was always the same slow piano loop, and the scent of disinfectant clung to every breath. They spoke to us in sing-song tones. "Let's get dressed, sweetheart," or "Time for a little snack, love." It didn't matter if you were a professor or a postal worker or a woman who once ran million-dollar audits. You were just another confused voice in a hallway of closed doors. The other residents floated through routines, some lucid, most not. I found myself smiling at people who called me Maureen or Edna. It was easier than correcting them. My room had no lock. My belongings fit into a single dresser. They assigned me a whiteboard with a daily schedule. Most days it read, breakfast, garden walk, art hour, rest. What it didn't say was the part that crushed me. No one visited. David didn't call. Tammy didn't write. The people who had promised to protect me disappeared as soon as they had the keys. I asked one of the aides about getting a phone. "Sweetheart, that's a little advanced for some of our residents. We don't want anyone getting confused or upset, okay?" I nodded. I smiled. And later that night, I cried into the scratchy pillowcase and bit the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't scream. The staff wasn't cruel, not openly, but they treated you like a problem to be managed. Medication time was prompt. Bathroom breaks were monitored. The food was soft and bland. I counted the number of peas in a scoop once. There were 13. I stopped asking for things. Every request was met with a head tilt and a note in my file. Resistant to care, delusional about legal rights, displays inappropriate independence. What does that even mean? I began to understand why people give up, but I wasn't ready to. Not yet. I began observing instead of participating. I watched the nurses, the shift changes, the locked cabinet where they kept personal items. I memorized the medication schedule when the aides lingered in the hallway and which ones would look the other way if you walked too far from the activity room. There was a woman named Ruth who hummed Moon River whenever she was scared. Another named Dottie always clutched a stuffed elephant with one eye missing. I watched how the staff handled them, kindly but quickly. Everything had a time limit. Feelings were inconvenient. Tears were treated like symptoms. One afternoon, I saw a new resident arrive. She was about my age, sharp-eyed, dressed in pressed slacks and a neat cardigan. She had a clipboard in her lap and kept asking staff detailed questions. By dinner, her nameplate read, Janet. She sat across from me, looked into my eyes, and said, "They told me I signed this. I don't remember signing anything." I didn't answer. But I reached across the table and took her hand. There were more of us than they thought. I tried to write in my journal every night. I kept the red ledger tucked under my mattress. I wrote in shorthand, blending real entries with fictional ones. D came today, smiled too much, touched drawer 3. Tammy said I forgot again. I didn't. I know I didn't. On the surface, it looked like ramblings, but to me, it was a net, a web, proof. I was alone, but I wasn't gone. And while David spent my money, moved into my house, and posed as the loving son, I was building a case line by line, day by day. I wasn't crazy. I was cornered. And cornered animals don't forget. They wait. Then they bite. It started in 1983. Back then, we lived in a modest duplex near the corner of 14th and Mayflower. Harold was working 2 jobs, janitor during the day, parking lot security at night. I handled the books for a mid-sized accounting firm, but I was still junior then, paid less than the men, always passed over for the bigger clients. David was 10, bright, curious, obsessed with space shuttles. He used to build rockets out of toilet paper rolls and aluminum foil. He said he wanted to be the first Langford on the moon. Then he got sick. First it was a cough, then it became pneumonia. Then the hospital visits started stacking like bricks. We had insurance, but it barely covered the essentials. Tests, injections, follow-ups, co-pays. I remember the first time we had to choose between groceries and antibiotics. I chose the antibiotics. I canceled my perm appointments. I mended my work blouses with fishing line. I cut Harold's hair myself in the kitchen sink. Every saved dime went to bills. David never knew. He just saw that the fridge still had food, that his school lunch had a note from me in it, that he still got a present on Christmas, even if it was secondhand. We sold Harold's truck. I walked to work for nearly a year, even in the snow. One morning, I slipped on black ice and cracked 2 ribs. I didn't tell anyone. I just wrapped myself in ace bandages and took aspirin with warm coffee. When David got better, we celebrated with chocolate pudding and a paper crown I made from old receipts. He wore it all day, called himself King Comeback. That night, I stayed up with Harold doing the numbers. We were nearly 3 months behind on rent. Utilities were next. I remember looking at the red overdue notice and laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "I could sell the ring," I said. Harold's face dropped. "My mother gave you that." "I know," and I did. The next day, I stood at the counter of Greystone Pawn and traded 14-karat gold and a lifetime of memories for $972. It covered the rent, the electricity, and just enough left to buy David new shoes for school. He never knew. There was another moment, years later. David was 17, and the letters from colleges were beginning to arrive. He had dreams too big for our budget and ambition too loud for our reality. One evening, I found him sitting on the back steps, college brochure in hand, looking smaller than I'd seen him in years. "I don't want to ask," he said. "I know we can't afford it." He wanted to major in aerospace engineering. The school he loved was out of state, and even with grants and loans, we'd still be short by thousands. Harold wanted him to apply anyway. "Let him dream," he said. "We'll figure it out later." I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Then I went back to work and asked for more hours. They said no. So I looked somewhere else. By the end of the month, I was working 2 jobs, accounting during the day and inventory audits at night for a logistics company 2 towns over. My car barely made the drive. I remember sitting in the parking lot at 3 a.m., drinking instant coffee from a thermos and massaging the ache from my knees. I did that for 2 years. When David graduated, we couldn't afford the trip to visit the university before move-in. I sent him with a suitcase, a box of peanut butter crackers, and the last $300 from our emergency fund. He called me from the dorm, breathless with excitement. "Mom, it's amazing. I'm gonna do it. I promise I won't let you down." I hung up the phone and cried in the hallway so Harold wouldn't see. He never let me down until now. David finished school with honors. He landed a job quickly, moved to the city, married Tammy, and started a family. At every holiday dinner, he would raise a glass to Harold and me. "To the people who made it all possible," he'd say. And I'd smile, because that's what mothers do, even when you're exhausted, even when you've sold your heirlooms and bled into your work, even when your body aches and your dreams get smaller. You smile because you're proud, but sometimes pride has teeth. The years went fast. Harold retired first. I followed a few years later, just after his heart began to falter. We spent our mornings reading the paper and our evenings playing gin rummy at the kitchen table. David called weekly, sent photos of the grandkids, promised visits that came late or not at all. When Harold passed, David was the one who handled the funeral arrangements. Efficient, polite, detached. He gave a lovely eulogy. "I owe everything to my father," he said. I remember the way my stomach turned. It wasn't that Harold didn't deserve the praise. He did. But I waited for David to say something, anything, about the woman who kept the lights on, who sold her ring, who walked to work in the snow, who sat in silence when others took the credit. He didn't. That was the first time I realized something had shifted, not in David, in me. Because when a person forgets your sacrifices, they start to believe they were entitled to them all along. So I let the memory of every sleepless night, every unpaid bill, every scraped knee and sleepless shift settle in my bones. Not as regret, but as armor. Because love and sacrifice are not the same thing as permission. And I had given enough. It was a Tuesday. A storm had rolled through the night before, and the courtyard was littered with wet leaves. I stood at the window, tracing a fingertip against the condensation on the glass, trying to remember what the air used to smell like after rain. That morning, Nurse Carla came on shift. She wasn't usually assigned to our wing, but one of the regulars had called out. Carla was in her early 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a low braid and eyes that had seen enough to know better than to believe everything in a patient file. She noticed my journal sticking out from under my mattress as she made the bed. Most nurses ignored it. "You write a lot?" she asked casually. I froze. "Just scraps," I said. "Dreams, memories, sometimes they jumble." She smiled, but there was curiosity behind it. Later that afternoon, she returned while the others were watching television. She closed the door gently. "I used to work elder care in Chicago," she said. "Saw some stories, some real messes wrapped in nice paperwork. You remind me of a woman I knew there. Everyone said she was losing her mind. Turned out she'd just been giving away her secrets too soon." She held out her hand. "You trust me?" I didn't know. but I needed to. I gave her the journal. She flipped through the pages, brows furrowing, then widening. This isn't confusion. No, I whispered. It's evidence. Carla closed the book slowly. You want out of here? I nodded. Then let's start with your lawyer. Her name was June Patterson, a former colleague from my nonprofit days. We'd stayed in touch loosely, birthday cards, holiday emails, but nothing recent. Still, I had scrawled her name and number in the journal, coded in a grocery list no one had thought to question. Carla took the number, said she'd call from her car on her lunch break, said she'd wear her hair down tomorrow if June agreed to come. The next morning, Carla walked in with her braid unbound, long gray strands spilling over her shoulder like a silent trumpet. Hope. The first real taste of it in months. I held it in my chest like fire, and I waited. June. Patterson looked exactly as I remembered her. Sharp suit, no-nonsense expression, lipstick like a battle flag. She walked into Rose Hill with a clipboard in one hand and a tote bag in the other, talking with such confidence that the receptionist didn't even ask for her credentials, just pointed her toward my room. When she arrived, she didn't waste time. You look like hell, she said. Good to see you too. We hugged, briefly, and then I handed her the red ledger. She opened it, stared at the pages, then back at me. Is this what I think it is? I used my old shorthand. Every number, every scribble, it's real. I've been tracking everything. David's visits, the money transfers, the signatures, the doctor, even the care home's billing practices. If you decode it, it's all there. June sat down on the edge of my bed and began scanning the entries. This is brilliant, she murmured. It's confusing as hell, but if we verify even half of this, it's enough to blow everything open. Can we? She nodded. We can, but we need corroboration and time. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. We talked in whispers for nearly an hour, strategizing. She asked about my will, my financial accounts, the court hearing. I answered everything I could, pointing to sections of the ledger like coordinates on a treasure map. June's eyes lit up when I described the bank statements I saw with David's name added. He forged that, she said. And if he used your money without proper authorization under guardianship, that's not just unethical. It could be criminal. A plan began to take shape. The ledger was more than a record. It was my weapon. Every woman has one. A thing no one suspects. Sometimes it's savings in a coffee tin. Sometimes it's a second key. For me, it was this book, a disguise of madness that told the truth louder than any plea. David thought he'd outsmarted me, but he forgot I built my life balancing books so tightly the IRS once thanked me for my clarity. He forgot I survived the 80s with nothing but math, coupons, and willpower. He forgot who raised him, and now he was going to remember. June left that afternoon with the ledger zipped into her tote bag like it was the crown jewels. We didn't hug when she left. She just looked at me with fire in her eyes and said, "Hold tight." The next few days passed slowly. Nurse Carla gave me updates in whispers. June had already pulled the court transcripts, the guardianship agreement, and my medical files. She was assembling an arsenal. On Thursday, June called Rose Hill. Not to speak with me, she knew they wouldn't allow it, but to speak with administration. She asked a dozen polite, pointed questions about their billing structure, their security practices, their patient rights documentation. I could imagine her jotting notes furiously, laying legal traps between her words. Carla came in later that day, her eyes wide. "Your friend just shook the tree," she whispered. Good. The next move was mine. I wrote David a letter. Not one he'd ever see, of course. Not yet. But I needed to put words to paper, to name what he did, to remind myself that silence wasn't the same as peace. Dear David, you think I forgot. You think I'm gone. You think your lies are stronger than my memory. But I watched you. I watched you laugh in my house. I watched you add your name to my accounts. I watched you sell my car, and I wrote it all down. One day, you'll read this, and you'll understand that the moment you tried to erase me was the moment I became impossible to ignore. Writing that letter felt like breathing after a long dive. I started to stand taller. I made my bed sharper in the mornings. I took longer walks in the garden and looked the staff in the eye when they spoke to me. Because now I had a secret they couldn't take. The weapon was out of its sheath. It was time to aim. The first move came in silence. June filed a petition to reevaluate my guardianship. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom scene, not yet. Just a formal request tucked into a clerk's inbox, stapled and stamped with precision. She attached excerpts from my journal, redacted names, highlighted patterns, side-by-side comparisons of financial documents, my accounts before David's control and after. The changes were stark. Even a blindfolded judge could feel the imbalance. Carla helped me gather more. Photographs of my old home, now repainted in neutral grays and turned into a rental. Receipts from designer furniture, billed to my estate. Pharmacy records that didn't match my actual medication schedule. Small things, but enough to build a picture. Meanwhile, David was oblivious. He sent no calls, no letters. I was a ghost to him, and ghosts, he believed, stayed quiet. June coached me for the upcoming evaluation. Be calm, be clear. They expect confusion. Give them coherence. I practiced speaking in full, concise sentences. I rehearsed dates, names, financial figures like I was preparing for a deposition, which, in a way, I was. Carla loaned me a cardigan with real buttons, not Velcro. We styled my hair so it wouldn't look too unkempt or too formal. I needed to appear sharp but not combative, competent but not coached. Women walk a narrow bridge when reclaiming power. Too strong and you're angry. Too soft and you're weak. I aimed for steel wrapped in grace. The court assigned a neutral third-party evaluator, a retired judge named Celia Watkins. June smiled when she heard the name. She's tough, but fair. Ms. Watkins visited Rose Hill unannounced. She sat across from me in the activity room. The TV was playing reruns of Wheel of Fortune, but I didn't look away. She asked me to tell her about my daily routine. I did. She asked about my medications. I listed them. She asked what year it was, who the president was, and how I felt about being here. I feel removed, I said. Not broken, not confused, just dismissed. She paused. And your son? I loved him more than breath, but love doesn't excuse betrayal. She nodded slowly. We said nothing more. Sometimes silence is the loudest evidence of all. 3 days after Celia Watkins' visit, June called. She's filing her report today, and from what I gathered, it's favorable. Very favorable. I didn't smile. Not yet. Not until the ink dried and the doors opened. June had already begun drafting a motion for emergency reinstatement of my rights. In it, she detailed not just the journal evidence, but the systemic failures that allowed David's conservatorship in the first place, the court's over-reliance on a single physician's testimony, the lack of follow-up, the speed at which my estate was handed over. And then there was the doctor, Dr. Sheldon Moore. I remembered his voice as he read from a clipboard, barely looking at me. Early onset dementia, he'd said. Mild cognitive decline with rapid progression. A lie, but a useful one. He'd been David's college roommate. That never came up in court. June contacted the state board with a formal complaint, citing conflict of interest and failure to properly evaluate a patient. It was the first domino. Meanwhile, Carla discreetly gathered additional information from the facility. Inconsistent medication logs, notes signed in handwriting that didn't match the usual nurse on duty, an entire week's worth of meals billed as specialized dietary when I'd eaten the same overcooked peas and boiled chicken as everyone else. June filed everything. Then we waited. 2 weeks passed. Then, on a humid Thursday morning, I was summoned to the administrator's office. The walls were beige and smelled faintly of antiseptic and printer toner. A man in a navy blazer sat behind the desk. Beside him, a woman in glasses flipped through a file. "Mrs. Langford," she said, "you've been granted a provisional review of your conservatorship. You will appear in court next Wednesday." I nodded, said thank you. Then I walked back to my room and closed the door gently. I placed both hands on the dresser, stared at my reflection in the small, cracked mirror, and whispered, "It's almost over." The courtroom was nothing like I remembered. No dark wood panels or sweeping drama, just fluorescent lighting, plastic chairs, and a judge with tired eyes. June stood beside me, steady as stone. David sat 2 rows behind, flanked by Tammy and their lawyer, who looked like he got his degree from a cereal box. He didn't recognize me at first. I wore the cardigan with buttons. My hair was pulled back. My voice didn't shake when I said my name. The judge asked routine questions. I answered each with clarity. Then June approached the bench and presented the journal. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not just a notebook. It is a record kept in shorthand by a woman with over 4 decades of accounting experience. It contains dated observations, coded financial entries, and evidence of deliberate manipulation by her conservator, Mr. David Langford." David stood up. "Objection!" The judge raised one brow. "You're not counsel, Mr. Langford." David sat down. June continued. She laid out the facts, the medical conflicts, the forged signatures, the unauthorized withdrawals, and finally, the letter I'd written. She read it aloud. David shifted in his seat. The judge reviewed the file silently for several minutes. Then he looked at me. "Mrs. Langford, do you feel capable of managing your own affairs?" "I do." "And if the court restores your rights, do you intend to pursue action against your former guardian?" "I intend," I said calmly, "to protect what's mine, whatever that requires." The courtroom went still. With a single stroke of his pen, the judge restored full control of my estate, medical decisions, and legal autonomy. The trap had been sprung. David turned pale. Tammy clutched his arm. Their lawyer blinked like someone had flipped off the lights. Outside, June squeezed my hand. "You did it." "No," I said. "We did." We didn't speak on the ride home, but as we pulled into the Rose Hill parking lot one last time, I turned to her and said, "Now let's go shut the rest of it down." David always thought he was clever. He assumed that once I was tucked away, the world would move on, that no one would question how a woman with a 40-year career suddenly became incompetent. That guardianship was just a signature, a transaction, a trophy. But trophies don't fight back. The morning after the court ruling, his world began to crumble. It started with the bank. He walked in with his usual swagger, expecting to withdraw funds from the estate account, only to be told it was frozen pending legal audit. The teller offered him a rehearsed smile and a customer service card. He called his lawyer. No answer. He tried to use the joint credit card at a boutique on Hawthorne Avenue. Declined. He tried again at the gas station. Declined. Back at home, Tammy stood in the kitchen holding a letter from the county office. Her voice trembled as she read it aloud. Subject to financial review, Improper authorization, possible restitution proceedings. David paced, barked at her, slammed drawers. He called me. I didn't answer. He called again, then texted, "What the hell is going on?" I deleted it. Then came the knock on his door. 2 men in blazers, calm, polite, and firm. They served him with notice of investigation into elder financial exploitation. They handed him a packet of documents and instructed him not to leave the state. Tammy cried. David sat on the edge of the couch, stunned. That afternoon, June filed civil motions for asset return and injunctive relief. The house he'd put in his name using my funds was now in dispute. So was the car, the brokerage account, the inheritance he hadn't even waited for me to finish living through. The domino had tipped, and nothing was stopping the fall. Tammy returned 3 days later with a stiff posture and an even stiffer silence. Her sister wouldn't take them in permanently. Neither would her mother. And the reality of David's unraveling reputation left little room for pride. "I should have known," she muttered one evening, arms crossed at the edge of the bed. "Your mother always gave me the creeps." David looked up from the kitchen table, where unpaid bills had begun forming towers. "She didn't do this. She couldn't. It's that damn lawyer friend of hers." "Don't be dense, David. She was always sharper than you gave her credit for. That journal? It's genius. Hidden in plain sight." He scoffed. "You're enjoying this." "I'm watching our life collapse because you couldn't wait. You couldn't ask. You had to take." The argument escalated. She accused him of arrogance, of dragging their family into ruin, of being too busy playing savior to notice he was the villain. He snapped back with venom, said she was ungrateful, that she spent his mother's money faster than he could cover the tracks, that she wanted the lake house more than he did. Their daughter walked in mid-sentence and burst into tears. The next day, Tammy started sleeping in the guest room. Neighbors stopped waving. David's emails piled up, unread, some from former clients, some from creditors, one from his alma mater rescinding a speaking invitation. He tried calling June again. No answer. He left a voicemail. "Tell her she's making a mistake. Tell her I'm still her son." No response. He sat in the driveway that night, engine idling, staring at the darkened street like it owed him something. But the house was no longer his fortress. It was just walls. And inside, the blame bounced between them like echoes in a tomb. The cracks widened quickly. Tammy began making calls, quiet ones, to her sister, to a real estate agent, to an old friend from high school whose husband worked at a bank. None of them led anywhere. "No one wants to be associated with us," she hissed at David. "That's because they're scared of lies. This'll blow over." But it didn't. The legal fees mounted. Their joint account slipped into the red. The brokerage account was locked. Even his gym membership declined. They fought over grocery lists. Tammy found a therapist. David refused. Their daughter stopped inviting friends over. One morning, David stood in the foyer, staring at the family portraits on the wall. He plucked one down, a beach photo, all smiles, and smashed it on the tile floor. "Do you feel better now?" Tammy asked from the stairs. "No, I feel erased." Welcome to how she felt. Later that week, David tried showing up at Rosehill. The front desk turned him away. "No visitors without written approval," they said. He raised his voice, demanded to speak to administration. They threatened to call security. He backed down. At home, he spent the night in his study, chain-drinking scotch and reading news stories about financial abuse. Every headline felt personal, every comment thread, a mirror. Tammy stopped speaking to him unless it involved logistics, rides, bills, school pickups. When he asked for a moment to talk, really talk, she said, "You had years. You wasted them." He began drafting emails to me. None sent, just saved drafts. In one, he wrote, "Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was the only one who could. But maybe it was about control. Maybe I was scared of watching you fade. I don't know who I am without you needing me." In another, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." He hovered over the send button more than once, never pressed it. Because deep down he knew the truth. This wasn't just about money. It was about memory, about legacy, about whose voice gets to survive, and I had taken mine back. The foreclosure notice came in a manila envelope, delivered by certified mail. Tammy opened it first. She read it, reread it, then dropped it onto the table like it burned. David stared at it in silence. The house was going to be auctioned off in 90 days. Too much had been borrowed against it. Too little was left. And now, with legal restitution looming, there was nothing left to shield them. Tammy packed a second suitcase. "I'll stay with my sister," she said. "For real this time." David didn't protest, just nodded, numb. She kissed their daughter goodbye, whispered something soft, then closed the door behind her. The click of the latch sounded like a final verdict. David sat in the silence. No footsteps upstairs, no dishwasher humming, no background television, just the sound of wind through the half-cracked window. He spent that evening in the garage, sifting through boxes. Some were filled with old tax returns, others with family photos, wedding invitations, birthday cards from me. He held one from when he turned 10, my handwriting inside, "You are the best part of everything I've done." He laughed, then cried, then laughed again. The next morning, a segment aired on the local news. Elder Abuse Awareness Month featured a short interview with June. She never named names. But the story she told, of a woman betrayed by her own son, was unmistakable. David turned off the television halfway through. He couldn't face the ending. That week, the sheriff's office confirmed that criminal charges were being considered. Not just restitution, but possible fraud, misappropriation, and perjury. David stopped shaving. His voicemail filled up. His LinkedIn page was deactivated. He started walking the neighborhood late at night, hoping for some piece of the world to look at him the way it used to. It never did. When the final notice came, he didn't open it. He just stood by the window, holding the unopened envelope, watching the mail truck drive away. The house around him, once polished, bright, and noisy, was now empty. The silence was complete. Everything he built on my name had turned to dust, and he had to sit in it, alone. The idea came to me while sitting in the library's back room, sorting through donated books. A woman had come in looking for a resource to help her mother navigate guardianship laws. She was soft-spoken, overwhelmed, and clearly embarrassed that she didn't know where to start. "I'm afraid I'll sign something wrong," she said. I handed her the right pamphlet, then another, then one I had written myself and tucked behind the reference desk. She squeezed my hand. "Thank you." And that's when I knew. There were more of us. Women who had been erased, overruled, outmaneuvered by people they loved. Women with full lives, sharp minds, and quiet strength, told to sit still and sign here. I started small, a flyer, a name, second ledger. I hosted the first meeting in the library basement. Only 3 women came, 2 widows, 1 caregiver. We sat in a circle and drank instant coffee from paper cups, while I shared my story in plain, clear language. By the end, they were crying. Not for me, for themselves. The second meeting had 8 women. The third, 15. Then the local newspaper ran a feature about us. Retired accountant builds safe haven for financially vulnerable seniors. And suddenly, I was getting emails from across the state. Carla helped with scheduling. June came to speak about elder law. Frank fixed the chairs. Helen donated supplies from her teaching days. We created handbooks, resource lists, a helpline. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman from the very facility where I'd been placed wrote me a letter. Her mother was there now. She said she noticed changes, discrepancies, odd charges. I didn't know who to trust, but then I remembered your name. She sent documents. I forwarded them to June. The investigation began within days. It wasn't revenge, it was prevention. And that made all the difference. As the group grew, so did our purpose. We weren't just warning signs anymore. We were resources, voices, a network. Local schools invited us to speak. Retirement centers called us for workshops. Even a regional NPR station asked for an interview, which I gave nervously, my voice cracking on the last line. Your signature is not just ink, it's your legacy. That line ended up on t-shirts. One morning, I found Carla sitting in my kitchen with an old shoebox. "What's this?" I asked. "My mom's paperwork," she said. "I want to learn the shorthand." I taught her, slowly, and she got it. Not just the symbols, but the spirit of it, the vigilance, the way the smallest details, initials, dates, timing, can tell the whole story. Soon, we were running mini courses. We called them the quiet tools. Simple tricks for documenting, for spotting red flags, for preserving autonomy. Women left those sessions standing taller, not because they were suddenly safe, but because they were seen. By winter, the local council passed a new ordinance requiring elder care facilities to provide transparent monthly reports to family members and an ombudsman. I got the letter confirming it just before the new year. I pinned it to my refrigerator, next to a recipe for lemon bars and a photo of me and Carla in the garden. The past wasn't erased. It was reaccounted for, and this time the ledger was in my hands. It was a Tuesday when the letter came. Plain envelope, familiar handwriting, no return address. I stood at the kitchen counter, holding it between my fingers, debating. Part of me wanted to throw it in the fireplace. Another part, an older part, the mother part, needed to see. I opened it. Just one sheet of lined paper. No greeting. "Mom, I hope you're well. I don't know what to say. I've lost everything. Tammy left. The house is gone. The kids won't speak to me. I don't know what I was thinking. I just wanted to protect you. I wanted to keep things simple. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I know I failed. I'm sorry. For all of it." That was it. No signature. Just a final sentence scribbled at the bottom. "I hope you found peace." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beside the stove, where I keep things I don't need but can't quite throw away. Then I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped onto the porch. The sun was warm. Birds called to one another across the fence line. Carla would arrive soon, and we'd walk to the community center together. Tonight, we were hosting a workshop for newly retired women. I looked out over the garden. The rosemary bush had doubled in size. The roses were in bloom. I took a deep breath. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was simply whole, free, seen. The kind of victory that doesn't need noise or headlines, just space, and a life, finally, that belongs to me.